People to me are so much more negative and pessimistic right now. And I get some of it, don't get me wrong. I think a lot of it has to do with politics. I think a lot of it has to do with social media. And I think just the real partisanship of politics these days. And I saw this in 2016 when I was watching CNN back then. When Trump first took over, CNN basically had to act like the world was ending. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, if you didn't vote for him, but like we're pretty good, like things are fine. And don't get me wrong, I know after COVID inflation, we're not in normal times here. But to me, we are getting back to normal times. And I still feel like there's way too many people are trying to act like it's just everything is terrible and it's the end of the world. And look, I'm 41 going on 42, and I feel like I have enough life experience. I mean, I went through the 2008 financial crisis. I was laid off from my job in Michigan in 2008. I got a new job here in St. Louis. Then immediately we were furloughed that year. I was wondering if I was going to have a job. So if you're talking about economics, I mean, obviously COVID, the world was shut down. Economically, people are losing their jobs, their businesses are closed. There's an eviction moratorium, getting back to what I was doing at the time, which was that was scary if you're in the rental property business. And look, this is why I kind of joke like most people are small time landlords that have a house or two for some extra money and it's not paid off. So when you all of a sudden say your tenants don't have to pay you your rent, that's pretty scary. That was very scary to me in 2020. We got through all of it. But then if you look, foreign policy, okay, we know what's going on in Ukraine, Russia, what's going on in Israel. But you and I, Eric, I mean, the last 20 years, I mean, Afghanistan, Iraq. I just feel like there's this thought that everything is so terrible and the world is on fire and it's the worst it's ever been. And I'm thinking to myself, I don't feel that way. And I don't think it's just because I do try to avoid as much as I can social media, and I try not to watch partisan news. I try to put things in perspective. But I do think it's the political divide. Right now, if you're on the right, you have to act like the world is ending. And the left did that under Trump. Don't get me wrong. But I think that's kind of also poisoning our brains. Like, Bill Maher said this a couple weeks back, he got crushed for it. He's like, why is everybody so negative? And everybody's like, okay, liberal coastal elitist millionaire who doesn't know what the cost of milk, right? I get that too, but I think there was a lot of truth in what he said. Like, can we have some perspective?
Right.
Can we have some context? I mean, we were just in COVID 2 years ago, 3 years ago. Now it's worse. Like, really? Now it's
Right.
worse?
Yeah, I think there's 3 reasons for it. What human nature, the business model of media, and social media. I think those are the 3 reasons. So some of it is just regular human nature. And we see this in our own lives. Think about your own life and think about things that when you were younger, you would have thought were amazing. And now, if you are lucky enough to have them, you just get used to them. You have a nice house and you want a bigger house. You drive a decent car and you want a nicer car. That is just human nature. I mean, could you imagine if like my grandmother who passed away in 2016, she was born in the 1920s. She'd have been 100. So she's probably would have been about 100 years old, right? So in the lifetime, could you imagine if you would have went back to when she was young or her talked to her parents and been like, in your daughter's lifetime, you will be able to take a flight from New York City to LA and have lunch in LA. Like you'll be able to wake up in New York City and have lunch in LA. And like that will be relatively affordable to a middle class or upper middle class person. You will be able to, do the things that we take for granted. You will walk around with a computer in your hand that can not only instantly access you through video to, people all over the world, but has like the whole sum of human knowledge at your fingertips. I mean, think about people would have been like, are you fucking crazy? Like, what are you talking about? And we just accept that as the way of the world. So I think part of it is human nature. We very quickly acclimate to what we have and we just take it for granted. And I think then you add on to that the business model of the media, which has always been negative. If it you worked in local TV news for a long time, if it bleeds, it leads. That is not a new saying. That has been around for a very long time. Negative news just plays better than positive news. It just does. We're more interested in it. And maybe there's probably deep-seated psychological reasons for that, but whatever the reasons are, media has figured out the business model, and they know what it is, and they feed it to you. And again, we're already predetermined to think things could be better. Then you throw in social media and its algorithms onto that fire. Because it's one thing for TV news to do it, but TV news you can tune in and out of. Cable news you can tune in and out of. The internet works on an algorithm. And if you get on YouTube or you get on X or TikTok, you're going to see that negativity. And if you start down that road, you're going to think that we live in the worst time that has ever existed. When in fact, you could argue, and I think you'd be right to say that and I want to be clear, I'm not saying being in like Ukraine or Gaza. I'm saying being in America in 2024, unless you are dirt poor, you're better off than 99% of human beings that have ever lived, and much better off than them. I mean, think about just the perspective here. Trying to just be as nonpartisan as possible. Just like over time, I just thought of three things off the top of my head, and I went and looked to make sure I was right on them. Three areas since they've gotten better just in our lifetime, since the 1980s. Violent crime. Look at a graph of violent crime from the 80s to today. And violent crime is down dramatically from its peak in the 1980s. We did have a little bit of a spike during COVID, but even with that, last year in 2023, the FBI reported that violent crime was down, murder was down 13%. That was the largest year-over-year decrease since we started recording statistics. That didn't get a ton of play, but that is, and again, I'm not political, take it out larger for a 40-year time frame. When you've had Republican and Democrat Congresses and presidents, violent crime's gone like this. Cancer deaths, the death rate from cancer has fallen so much that they estimate 4 million fewer people have died since 1991, so in 35 years, than would have died if cancer rates were as high as they were in the early 90s. That's how far cancer death rates have fallen. Obviously, we still have too many people dying from cancer, still work to do, but that is a dramatic increase that has literally saved millions of lives. How about another one? Teen pregnancy. Teen pregnancy, since it peaked in 1991, is down 75%. 75% in 30 years. That is an amazing decrease in teen pregnancy. So those are just three kind of areas that I thought off the top of my head, and I just checked the data to confirm that, where we have made in a relatively short period of time tremendous progress. And these are things you don't hear a ton about on the news. They're reported every once in a while, but we're not banging the drum of, man, look how much better we have done in these three, I would say, relatively important areas of life.
Yeah, and the teen pregnancy one surprised me. I kind of knew that violent crime had peaked in late 80s, 91. I didn't know about the cancer numbers, but the teen pregnancy one surprised me here. And we talk politics on this show, but I think another big part of it, you talked about social media and the algorithms, but it's the old saying that comparison is the theft of joy. And if you're even taking politics out of it, I think, to me, we live in this just thing culture of consumerism where it's about clout on social media, unfortunately, with so many of these youngsters and shoes and clothes and cars and whatnot. And I just think, like, growing up, we didn't have social media. So, okay, you knew the kid in school that maybe had the nicest house, that had the nicest car, whatever it is. But now on social media, like, everybody always gives you the best version of their life. I've always tried to not the showy things on social media, whether it's a vacation, you get a house, you get a car, whatever it is. I've always been the person I've tried not to put that out there because I think so much of it is about just bragging about your life. But man, like, I can see how if you're already kind of just like a depressed person, and then you look at Facebook or Instagram, and all you see is the best version of not just people at your school anymore, not just your neighborhood, but everybody on earth. You're now
Yeah.
comparing yourself to everybody on earth. It's like, what is going to be good enough? You mentioned earlier about you got the house, you want a bigger house. I think there's way too much of that. Sometimes, hey, enjoy the house you have, enjoy the family you have, enjoy the car you have. Don't always be looking for the next bigger house, bigger car, whatever it is. I think that's also a huge part of, like, we've become more vapid as a society, especially in
Yes.
America, since social media.
Yes.
Facebook has made it terrible. Instagram has made it terrible. Just everything, and the way women and people show each other, show their bodies on. That's a different topic. But like everything we're doing on social media, I think a lot of it is really, really for the worse. And it plays into what we're talking about. Just nobody can enjoy themselves. Like even, I'm a girl, I'm hot. Oh, there's the girl on Instagram. She's way hotter than I am, right? Like, oh, she's getting all the likes. I'm the cute girl at school, but there's this woman in Hollywood with fake everything. She's got 2 million subscribers. She's bouncing her boobs and ass everywhere, right? Like people are
I
comparing
want to be
everything
clear.
to.
You enjoy watching these videos. You're just making a broader point. I get what you're saying.
Listen, I'm not going to act like I've never seen these videos, but again, think about it from a young girl's perspective. A
Right.
young girl in high school is like, how can I compete with this? All the boys, you go to Instagram, and probably all the boys on Instagram are following this woman and liking all her booty videos, right?
Yeah, I think first of all, I love the comparison as the thief of joy quote. That's one of my all-time favorite quotes. I think it's great. And I think it really does put it in perspective. I also want to be clear, I'm guilty of a lot of the things that I talk about, like the human nature part of it, of wanting, more. And I'm certainly guilty of the putting nice things on social media because like I look at my own life on social media and I'm like, this because of course I post things that I think, people will like, but you're not going to post the really tough moments necessarily or the things that are, not going to be the most flattering. And those, of course, that's how life is. And if everybody does that, you're right, it leads to a social consciousness of this is how life should be. And of course, that's ridiculous. And it plays on our human nature and also romanticizing the past. I talked about housing earlier. And yes, it is very, trust me, I understand. As someone who rents and would love to own a home, I'm in the boat living in the LA area of it is crazy expensive to try to buy a home here. So I totally sympathize with that. But one thing you have to keep in mind when we bring up the comparison of, well, in the let's say 50s, after the war, you had everybody owning a home on one salary often because many women didn't work. And you had families of 3 or 4 children and a home could be bought. And that is true. That is true. But look at those homes. They were tiny. Those homes, by the average home size back then was like 1,500 square feet. And you had, instead of families with one kid like you see today, or 2 at the most, they had 3, 4, 5 kids sharing that space. So yes, it is true. They were able to afford homes at a much younger age and with a much lower income than we can now. But they also were satisfied with those smaller homes and cramming big families into them. We are no longer satisfied with that for the most part. We want bigger homes, nicer homes, 2,000 square feet. Nowadays people would be like, I can't cram myself into there. They want 4, 5, 6,000 square feet. They want the 3rd bathroom. They want the 5th bedroom for their guest. And so if you can't get those things, you're like, oh man, in the 1950s, they had these houses. Well, yeah, you wouldn't want to live in that house they had in the 1950s. You'd be miserable. So and that's a generation or two. Our expectations just keep getting more and more and more. And that feeds into the cycle of everything is terrible. When really, if you step back and have any kind of perspective, it is not. It just is not. And again, we always have to preface this with saying there are real problems. Absolutely. In America today, there are people suffering. There are homeless people. There are people really struggling. What we're talking about though is human beings overall, particularly in America in 2024. And if you have some perspective, I think you see it's not as bad as the media would lead you to believe.
Yeah, and by the way, I'm guilty of this too. Don't get me wrong. We were laughing about this on the radio the other day because so my daughter takes taekwondo, and over the last couple years they'll do these sparring exercises. And my daughter's pretty good. So they might spar two, three, four times. Well, she might win two, lose one, or maybe she has a great day, she wins them all, but early on she was having days where she was losing most of them. And it's funny because if you're filming it, what's the one you put on Facebook? You don't put the
Right.
loss. You don't put her getting freaking dominated. Yet she might have went 1-3 in sparring.
Right.
3 losses, 1 win. You put the 1 win on Facebook. And I always laugh like and I would do the same. So we're joking here. But like your kid plays baseball. Your kid goes 1 for 4, he might have a single and 3 strikeouts. Well, you're posting the single. You're deleting the strikeouts for sure.
Right. So now your kid, so now people see your kid, they probably think she's like this Taekwondo black belt,
Right.
because that's what happens when you have, I think social media, so social media factors into this discussion in a large way, but obviously there's a much bigger issue of social media. I think we will look back on social media in the future and we will put it in the same category as alcohol and marijuana, and we will say like gambling. It will be one of those things where it will be legal and people will enjoy it and there will be positives to be gained from it, but we will limit in some way the access of children to it in some way. Maybe not exactly like we do with alcohol. I'm not saying the age limit will be 21, but I'm saying we will draw a distinction between how adults consume it and how children consume it, just like we do for those other things. I think that's eventually where we will land with social media, because studies are starting to show, and I think anecdotally you're right, especially as you pointed out with younger girls, that it is harmful to them. It is harmful to them in some of the same ways that these other things are harmful. And when we find data backs up that things are harmful to children, we restrict children's access to them, I think, as we should. And I think that's eventually where we will land on social media in the future.